Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Welcome to Parenting in the 21st Century. I'm Zina Shevchik. Today we're going to talk about the SATs, the Scholastic Aptitude Test, with Kathleen Schwartzbeck from the Sylvan Learning Center in Niskayuna. Thank you very much for being with us again.
Oh, thanks for having me.
The first thing, in case some members of our audience don't know what the SATs are, perhaps you could just explain.
Definitely. The SATs are one of the college entrance exams that many colleges require that their students who are applying to them take. So it's one way to compare students in the colleges to see which would be the applicants they're going to accept and so forth. So it's just a test that looks at math, critical reading, and writing skills, and it is able to rank, give students a score, and help them place themselves in that applicant pool.
Okay. Who meaning what grade level, and when are those tests taken, generally?
The SATs are typically taken for the first time in the spring of a student's junior year. They tend to take the PSATs in the fall, which are kind of a shortened version. It's also made by the College Board. The PSATs, it's similar to the SATs, but it's used for scholarship opportunities and a chance to practice the SATs, your pre-SAT. And then the SAT itself is taken that spring year of your junior year. And then depending on whether or not you want to take it again or get a higher score, a lot of students take it again their fall of their senior year.
Okay, so that's the PSATs, which I guess must mean preliminary SATs. And you're saying they're usually taken in the fall of junior year, but sometimes people do take it earlier. Am I right?
Sometimes they do. Yep.
It's a private organization that puts these tests together, the College Board. So there is a fee.
There is a fee for them, yes.
For every test that you take.
Yep.
All right. I want to make that clear that it's not associated with the federal government. I mean, it's not the federal government or the state governments or the school districts that are putting together these tests. It's a private company.
Exactly.
That colleges and universities have used for a long time, right?
They definitely have.
So, is it needed for all college admissions? You said some colleges. I gather that there's from what I'm reading, is there's a movement toward making the tests optional in an admissions package.
Yes, and many colleges have gone that way. They've said that it is an optional test, that students don't need to take it. And really, the key to that is figuring out what college does the student want to go to, what are their top 3 or top 5 colleges, and see what are their requirements, do they need an SAT, and so forth. And then they decide whether or not to go ahead and take that test. Even if it's optional, it's still recommended that a student take it because it's one more way that you can really set yourself apart from the competition.
And I assume it also will give you an idea, the student, an idea of where they might fit in when they're, into the different colleges, because colleges publish their range of SAT scores that their incoming students have. I think that's one of the
they definitely do.
One of the tools that students and parents can use to kind of figure out where their student might fit in a college, correct?
Exactly.
Okay. It's changed over the years. My experience with it was about 6 years ago with my children, so it was beginning to change at that time. So maybe you could talk about the actual content of the test.
The content, it has changed. Okay. It used to just be your verbal and your math, and verbal was made up of critical reading and analogies. Everyone remembers analogies on the SATs. And then the math only went up through about your basic algebra. A couple of years ago, they changed that. They took the analogies out and they added in writing portions. So there's a grammar portion, there is a sentence, correcting your sentences, things like that, as well as a 25-minute timed essay where the student's given a prompt and a quote, and they get to respond to that in 25 minutes. And then math got harder as well. It now goes up into about Algebra 2, so it covers more geometry and higher level algebra.
So again, I did a little bit of reading before this, and I guess it seems that they're moving a little bit away from it being an aptitude test and maybe more a reflection of what the students learned in the schools. Am I correct?
A little bit. It is still a totally different type of test than the other tests that they've taken. So the aptitude still plays into that, but there is adding in that essay and there's not a set grade for that. And those types of things has definitely changed it. And the student gets a chance to show a little bit of their personality.
Okay, so what about the other tests that people talk about, the ACT? Because I know my children took both the SATs and the ACTs. And what would you say about that?
Many students still do that. They'll take both tests, see which they do better on. A lot of schools will take the scores for both tests as well. There are still some schools that take one or the other. It really just depends on what the college they're looking at is looking for. The ACT is it's set up differently. It actually tests on some science skills as well. So the tests and the questions are a little bit different, and the essay is optional for the ACT. So students, based on where their strengths are, they might be able to shine on one test versus the other.
Okay. Before we go on, I would like to talk a little bit about the SAT subject test, just so we clarify that generally when we're talking about SATs, we're talking about a scholastic reasoning? Is that what they call it?
Yeah, it's the SAT reasoning test, which is the one that most students take. The SAT subject tests, or the SAT-2s, are used for certain colleges, and they are based on just subjects. So you can take an SAT in biology, that type of thing. And it really depends on what your major is going to be and what the college is looking for. They might require you to take so many SAT-2s or SAT subject tests.
And so those are more focused on what you have learned in a specific subject.
Exactly.
Where the SAT reasoning is still very much an aptitude exam.
Exactly.
Right, okay. So you recommend Sylvan Learning Center, do they recommend that people begin to prepare for the PSATs? Do you suggest preparation for the PSATs, or just taking it cold and using that as a guide to how to study for the regular SATs?
I know students who've done it both ways, and they've seen success both ways. Preparing for the PSATs, it is used for some scholarship money. So if a scholarship is really important to you, spend some time really looking into and preparing for the PSAT. If you just want it to see how you're going to do on the SAT and what that's going to look like, then you can go in and just take it to get that idea of where you're at, if you want to just figure out where you fit there. So it depends on what the student's goal is for the PSATs. Preparation never hurts. Spending a little more time looking at your vocabulary, things like that, never hurt when going into a test.
So talk a little bit about the preparation for these exams and what you help students with, and perhaps giving tips to parents and students themselves on how to get ready to take these exams.
Okay, definitely. There's a lot of different ways you can prepare for the SAT, and most of it is just starting with, how prepared has school made me for the SATs? Are there certain subject or classes that have really made me confident with that? Sometimes students feel like they've gotten enough from their classes, and some students have. So then just brushing up on their vocabulary and checking up on those skills, things like that are important. The calculator, making sure you're comfortable with your calculator, is important in there. You don't want to spend time trying to figure out which button you're supposed to push when you only have so much time for the test itself. So those are kind of really small things you can do. There are tons of books out there on how to prepare for the SAT and practice exams. You should always take at least one practice exam before going in for your first test, so you know what to expect. It's almost 4 hours of testing. And if you don't know what to expect, that's a long 4 hours. So breaking that apart and taking a practice exam, being prepared in that way, helps as well.
That's tough. I know my kids were, exhausted. It's just, it almost seems productive, to me anyway, to expect a student to perform well for a straight 4 hours. I know they get some breaks, but they're very
Small.
restricted as well, and where you can go and be and what you can ingest, all sorts of things, and also often the physical environment they're in for those 4 hours is very often not particularly comfortable.
That's true. They're in those hard chairs and at those desks.
So-
It's not the best format to sit for 4 hours, but they do it.
Is there a routine or a schedule for how, what's first, second, third, and fourth in an exam? When you sit down, do you know that you're going to do the math first and the writing second, or?
You don't. You know the essay will be first. That's always the first thing you do is a 25-minute essay.
Oh, it is? Oh.
But after that, it gets mixed up in terms of what is going to be the first section you do. So that's one of the ways that they keep it, the integrity of the test as well, is that no two tests are the same. So they're going to change up the order that the questions are in terms of which section comes where. The one thing you do know about the SAT is if you're on a math section, it will go from easy to hard. And if you're on a critical reading section, there's some different ways to figure out which type of question you have. So a lot of it is designed easy to hard throughout that test.
So there's a lot to know. I mean, there's a lot that you can learn before you sit down to take the test that could really make a difference in the score. Talk a little bit about what a good score is. That was part of what I was reading about. What determines a good score, because it's different according to who you talk to.
It is, and a lot of it really depends on what that student wants to do, where they want to go to school, and if you take that first test and you are a couple 100 points away from where you want to be, then you might need to figure out what will be the best school. But most students can fit into their school range and just need to work to make sure that their grade gets there and they get that good grade for them. So it just really depends on what that student is, what they want, and what's going to work for them. The way the test is scored is different from most tests, and not everyone realizes that. You get 1 point for a correct answer, you lose 1/4 of a point for an incorrect answer, and you don't lose anything if you skip a question. So students always want to answer every question because that's how they've been trained, is to answer every question. You don't want to do that on the SAT. If you can't eliminate any answers, don't answer that question. Move on, and you'll maximize your score and be able to get the good score for that student.
The ACT, is that scored a little bit differently?
It is. It's similar. The same. You lose a fraction of a point for incorrect answers, and you gain a point for correct answers. So it's not a 1-to-1 correlation, but it is slightly different.
So it's good, but it's something good to know when it's something that can help you when you're taking the exam.
Definitely.
So I think what when I was preparing for myself 40 years ago, we just kind of went in and took the exam, and for my kids it's very different. I mean, they're talking about it very early even in middle school. They're starting to talk about in schools. They're actually starting to talk about it. So the kids generally seem to know that they need to be thinking about it before test day, which I assume is what Sylvan certainly would recommend.
Definitely. You want to make sure that you put some thought into it and prepare ahead of time. And that's going to look different for each student as well. Some students just need to have the book in front of them, do a self-study, and they'll be able to do that well. Other students need a formal class of some sort. And then even when you look at classes, there's some really large classes or there's smaller individualized classes. So it depends on what each student needs and what will work for their style. Knowing their goal ahead of time and knowing about where they're at with that practice exam will help them to be able to do that.
And back to a little bit what we were talking about with the good score, I mean, if they do give individual scores for math, what would you call it?
It's critical reading.
Critical reading and writing. So it's not just one big score, and the student and the colleges don't look at the separate ones. They do, so that if you're interested in math, if you're not don't have as great a score in the critical reasoning or the writing, it might not matter as much. So colleges don't expect necessarily a high score, we'll say, on each component.
Right. They're not. Some colleges are looking for that more balanced student, but if you're going to a math-based program in a math-based college, they're really focusing on that grade. Some colleges have actually gone to, and this is kind of an experimental thing, so you never know if it will change or not, but where if a student takes a test more than once, they'll take the best score for each subtest versus just the best SAT itself. So another chance to kind of look at all those different areas separately. Traditionally, colleges have taken the best overall SAT that students have done. You can take it as many times as you want. You do have to pay for it each time. A lot of students will just say, well, I can take it again. Usually 2 times is what most students do with it. They take it once, they find out where they're at, they do a little more preparation, take it a second time, they're usually close to their goal then.
It's a real, I mean, given that it's 4 hours, I mean, aside from the money, given that it's 4 hours, it's a real trial in my estimation. And if you're also taking ACT exams and maybe some subject tests and all the Regents exams, I mean, this is why there is publicity about, where are we testing we're teaching to testing, and we're being, our students are being inundated with taking tests rather than actual learning. So.
And there's a lot of different tests out there that they're asked to take, and a lot of it, especially when you're looking to go to college, you need to really, you don't need to take every single test out there. You need to figure out what makes sense for where you want to be with your college. And whether you look at 2 to 3, typically when students say, okay, these are my 3 top colleges, you tend to see a lot of consistencies with those colleges, what they're looking for, the types of colleges, and then you can gear your preparation in that way.
Would you talk a little bit more about the essay, because that is the new part, and you just go into a little bit more detail and what you recommend, how you might recommend someone might approach this timed essay.
And the timed part is what scares a lot of students, and then they get tripped up on the fact that they only have 25 minutes to write an essay. You still should take time to pre-write and get your thoughts together before you write the essay. If there's a few grammar mistakes, spelling mistakes, they're not going to be taken off points-wise. It's a holistic grade for the essay. Do they get their point across? So if a student takes a couple minutes and says, okay, this is what I'm going to argue, and these are the 3 examples I'm going to use, and then writes the paper from there, they'll be able to manage their time better and also create an essay that will have a better score for them. Key point to the essay is to pick a side. The prompt will always give you 2 sides. Do you agree or disagree? Don't try to ride the fence and say, well, sometimes it's true and sometimes it's not. Agreeing across the board or disagreeing, really having a strong point of view is the best way to write a strong essay.
Okay, so they're looking for some persuasion and comparison as well. So, yeah, that was tough. My kids were the first. They were the guinea pigs. They were the first. But the benefit was that the schools were the colleges were unsure about how to handle the writing scores. So they really didn't weighted as much in their deliberation as they probably do now. I know schools do some, well, different schools do some teaching to the test. I know the English teachers do try to prepare the students for it as well. But talk a little bit about what Sylvan offers, because I think that's important. I know you offer some free online material as well. So.
Yep. There's a lot of free online resources out there, and then we also offer preparation classes in our center. They're all small group, so they don't go beyond 10 to 12 students, and they're very individualized based around what they need. There's 3 practice exams. Again, take practice exams, find a chance to see how you're going to do. And then we talk a lot about what are your test-taking strategies. You do not have time to relearn everything that might be on the SAT because you don't know what's going to be on it. So helping students know which questions should they focus on, which questions should they skip. Those strategies is what's really going to maximize those scores. So really giving them that chance to learn about the test. That's really key for any preparation, is learn about that test and focus on what your strengths already are, and don't worry about the things you might not have gotten to yet, because you can skip those questions. You're not going to lose any points, and you'll get points for those questions you can't answer.
Well, I know test-taking anxiety is, talked about quite a bit. And so it seems to me that as much as you can, the more you practice, probably the less anxious you'll be. So that's
exactly
right. So I mean, if you can put yourself in that circumstance, you learn. If the anxiety doesn't go away, at least you learn to work through it. I mean, that's my experience, and what I've taught my kids is that it's not abnormal to be nervous and to have butterflies and that kind of thing. But the more you do something that creates that feeling in you, the more you're able to learn your own personal way of managing through the anxiety. So that's what practice does.
Definitely.
I also, on your website, I saw that you offer a class, it's like a one-time 90-minute class for parents on, I can't remember the exact title of the course, but it has to do with shepherding your kids through school. And would you talk about that a little bit?
It's a seminar about, we have a few different seminars for parents. We do have an SAT, ACT, how to really tackle those college entrance exams, to navigate your way through that, as well as some high school and middle school programs that we have. We also have coming up in our Clifton Park Center, we are going to be hosting, it's the word I'm looking for, hosting Marna Atkins, who's a co-author of Idiot's Guide to Getting into a Top College, and she's going to be talking to families about how to get into a college. So that's coming up in the beginning of October, which should be on our website soon. So there's different ways we want to work with different people in our community as well as having these other programs for parents. But we've had parents who just stop in and say, can you just help us out with this? Can you tell us where we should go or what they should be doing? And we're more than happy to, even whether they're a student or not, to sit down and talk about what the best plan is for them.
And it's tough for parents because, they talk about helicopter parents these days, us hovering over our children, trying to make sure everything's just okay and perfect almost for our children. But we often get in the way that way of our children learning, through experience to how to work through a lot of things. But we also, with parents, as with any homework, at Sylvan, which is where you're tutoring, it's often easier to have an outside person or an organization deal with the anxiety of whether it's homework or test taking, because the parent gets to be the boogeyman in a way, for a student, and becomes a source of anxiety in the whole family dynamic. So
we've actually had parents who are teachers who have come to us and said, I just am having a hard time helping my child, and I shouldn't, because I'm a teacher. And it's just because the child wants a different relationship when they're at home. So bringing them somewhere else tends to help with that. They hear it from someone else. It's kind of that, never believe what mom says, but if someone else says it, it's true. Things like that, students do have that mentality. And a lot of it is that they just want a different relationship when they're home. So we're more than happy to help with that. And one of the things we do offer is a lot of parent communication, monthly parent meetings, anytime they want to stop in and say hello, so that we are making sure we're giving the parents what they need as well, because it's a full dynamic relationship between them. So we want to help that.
Do you know anything, how's this? Do you know anything about whether the SAT or ACT scores have changed over the years? Do you know anything about trends?
I know a little bit about trends. I try to follow them pretty closely. More and more students are taking the SAT than ever before. More and more students are applying to college than ever before. So the more students that are going in there, the average has fluctuated a little bit. Sometimes it depends on what you read, where it's at. But a lot of that is because there are just more students there that are taking it. So the averages in certain areas seem like they might have gone down a little bit, or in other areas they might have gone up. It's just a matter of more people applying to college, more people trying to go there. Which is great. We love to see that. So making the main trend that I've seen consistent through everything I've read is that more students are taking it, more opportunities are out there for for them to really shine. So hopefully we'll get even more kids into college. See where
So
they can
it's
go.
becoming more important, that's all, and people are becoming aware of its importance.
Mm-hmm.
Are you seeing younger and younger people coming in asking for assistance?
Mm-hmm. We are. We have had middle school parents who've asked us about the SAT. They're that aware of it, that it's coming up. And you can start, you wouldn't want to take a preparation class specifically for that test yet, but you can start studying vocabulary or any of that at any point. Vocabulary is the key point to raising your grade on the critical reading portion. If you know what those words are, you're going to do well. And that's going to help you throughout everything you do. So working on that vocabulary, practicing your reading, things like that can be done at any point.
As a librarian, I know that.
Yes.
Read, 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 and it is true, it helps. The earlier you start developing a habit and a love of reading with your children, the more likely they're going to read leisurely, whether it's magazines and that, or actual books, or even graphic novels help. And I do know that it enhances your spelling, it enhances comprehension, it just, in addition to vocabulary, it just makes everything easier.
It does.
So I know in our library, I just want to point out, and I'm sure you know this, I'm just going to be telling our audience that the library also has study guides for the SATs and ACTs and subject, and many public libraries subscribe to databases that library holders can access to take practice exams as well. There's a lot.
Excellent.
So there's a lot of opportunity. I think I'm going to pass it over to you and say, is there anything we haven't talked about that you would like to emphasize or reiterate? Or
I think the key points, which you just mentioned as well, are just practice. You can't relearn everything that is going to be on that test, as I mentioned earlier. So utilize all the resources you have. Utilize your teachers at school. Utilize your public library. Utilize all that information to really maximize what students already know. They'll do fine on that. Know what your goal is and then work towards that goal.
And I also know for myself that you have to start. I mean, there's a, that's the, you have to be there, and that sometimes the anxiety I know with myself and with children is to just start, and sometimes it just isn't as difficult as you might think it is. So sometimes the anxiety before is just the problem in the first place. So between teachers, schools, tutoring opportunities, libraries, there's a lot of sources and resources to use to prepare. Would you tell something about you and your organization and how people can contact you?
Definitely. As you mentioned at the beginning, my name's Kathleen Schwartzbeck. I'm the director of our Niskayuna Sylvan Learning Center. We actually have 3 Sylvans in the center, or in the capital region. There's one in Albany and one in Clifton Park as well. And we have been here since 1996. Our Albany Center opened. And we've had a great time working with all the families in this area, really just helping students of all ages and abilities to really do the best that they can. So we start with 4.5 years old and then go up through. We've helped adults with test taking and things like that as well. So anyone who has a need, most of them we can help. And if not, we try to help them find the best place to go to really get what they're looking for. So we love to have people come to us. Our website's sylvanlearning.com, or they can call us directly at 869-6005 to get any more information about anything we offer.
Thank you very much for being with us, Kathleen.
Thank you for having me.
For all that information. Thank you for being with us, Parenting in the 21st Century.